Hey guys, Brian from Boas here. Today I'm going to discuss a topic I get asked about by my viewers an awful lot, and that is breeding loans. So I'm going to tell you my opinion about breeding loans, the only two situations where I would consider a breeding loan, and then I'm going to give you guys some tips in case you're thinking about entering one of your snakes into a breeding loan. Of course, I'm going to show you some beautiful locality boas like this Argentine Boa, so be sure to stay tuned. So breeding loans seem pretty straightforward. You have a male snake that has no mate. Your friend or acquaintance has a female snake of the same species and locality that has no mate. You ship your male snake to the acquaintance. They breed the snakes. And so the snakes get to breed. You and the acquaintance both get babies. What could possibly go wrong? Well, turns out a lot can go wrong. So you can probably tell I'm not so keen on breeding loans. One of my friends recently contacted me and asked me about a breeding loan, and the situation was he's got this beautiful young adult male snake. I'm not going to tell you the species, but it's a rare species. It's quite in demand, and it turns out the breeder of that snake contacted him and asked him if he would consider sending the snake back to him for a breeding loan. And so this was a little surprising to me because this particular breeder is well known for breeding this particular type of snake. There's actually not too many breeders. And it seemed a little strange that the breeder would be contacting one of his customers to try to get a snake back for a breeding loan. I mean, breeders should be organized and they should hold back their own animals so that they don't need to go after, customers to try to get animals back on breeding loans. So my friend asked me what I thought about this, and other background is that my friend has this snake as a pet. He's not intending on breeding it, and it's one of his favorite snakes. It's a beautiful, spectacular animal, very prized snake, and there was no information given by the breeder about how the breeding loan would work. My friend would send the snake back, and then he would be compensated, but there was no details given. So this was definite red flag. So of course I advised my buddy, do not enter into this breeding loan. It just sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. And so I'm going to go over why I think breeding loans are bad in the majority of cases. But first I wanted to give you just the only two situations where I would consider a breeding loan. Okay, so the first is if the person you're going to loan the snake to is a very close friend. Okay, this is somebody that you are friends with not just because they have snakes. They're not just some connection on Facebook that lives 2 states away, but somebody that is a real close friend that you could basically just show up at their house at any time and be invited in. No holds barred. They share everything with you, and you completely 100% trust this person. They also live very close by, within an hour, 2 hours tops by car, so that you could transport the snake to their house by car. You could show up whenever to pick it up, etc. And you 100% trust this person. So in that case, I would consider maybe possibly doing a breeding loan. The other situation is if it's an extremely rare snake, okay? For example, there's only 2 animals in the United States. I have the male, the other person has the female, okay? In that case, a breeding loan would be necessary to perpetuate the species in captivity in the United States, so I would agree to a breeding loan. But it would be not just a loan, it would really be a sale with option to buy back the snake. For example, if I had the male, I might agree to something like, well, I will agree to ship you the snake for $3,000. Okay, you will pay me that money. And then if there is a successful reproduction, I will get some of the babies and I will be able to buy the snake back from you at the price you paid to me. Something like that. So it's really not a loan, it's like a sale with an option to buy back. But what would be really important is that all of the terms would be explicitly outlined in writing, and we would have a document that we would both agree on. Okay? So those are really the only 2 situations where I think that a breeding loan would make sense for me. Thought I'd change up the snake, and this is a beautiful 2018 Honduran Firebelly male holdback. One of my favorite holdbacks, probably the most beautiful Firebelly I produced. And no, I won't be loaning him to you for breeding, so please don't ask. So as far as breeding loans, what can go wrong? Well, I'm not going to go into any specific examples. If you go to any of the reptile forums or Facebook groups and you do a search for breeding loans, there are numerous stories about things that have gone bad. And there are lots of examples of what were supposedly established breeders that, you know, got somebody to participate in a breeding loan, and just all kinds of negative things. So snakes that were never returned. So after the end of the breeding loan, the person that has the snakes just kind of ghosted and, you know, cut off contact and absconded with the snakes. There are examples of snakes which have been sent back after the breeding loan in terrible condition that require extensive veterinary intervention, you know, in order to bring them back. Cases where snakes die on breeding loans under mysterious circumstances. Just all kinds of negative experiences. In addition to the person that is receiving the snakes doing something negative, you know, or criminal that can affect the outcome of the breeding loan, there's also certain other aspects which are just inescapable. So whenever you have a snake that goes into another collection, it's potentially going to be exposed to pathogens, things like parasites and disease. So mites are very common in a lot of people's collections, and they're not often discussed, but unfortunately you really need to do all that you can to avoid mites. There's a lot of diseases out there like arenavirus leading to inclusion body disease, or IBD, and this is thought to be pretty common in people's boa collections. About the only way to avoid these things is to have a closed collection. So you establish your collection, but then once you reach a certain point of, you know, having the animals you want, the only animals that continue the colony are the holdbacks. Okay, and this is a good thing, goal to achieve. So once you've been collecting for a certain number of years, you've already gotten all the snakes and all the genes you're going to want, and your collection is closed. And that's really the only way you can guarantee a healthy collection. So anytime you ship a snake to another collection or receive a snake in on a loan, there's the possibility of the exchange of pathogens. Another issue is injury. So when boas breed, it's not uncommon for there to be some kind of injury, and you can do all that you can to try to avoid this, but the truth is that any breeding exposes your boas, both the male and the female, to a higher level of risk. And so with the male, you can things like hemipenes, which become prolapsed, and the hemipene can't go back in, and sometimes it has to be amputated. You can have boas which will attack each other. You know, they don't recognize the new mate, or they may think that the mate is food, for example. Cases of even cannibalism. So on a breeding loan, your snake could be attacked, bitten, and possibly even cannibalized by the mate. And so you might say, well, you know, I am okay, I'm not going to send my snakes out, but if I get a snake in, that could be fine. Well, what if you have a snake on a breeding loan, you put it in with your snake, and your snake attacks that snake and does injury to it? If your snake causes damage or injury to the snake on loan, you're going to have to financially compensate the owner of the snake and just make sure that the snake is in its restored to its optimal condition. And so ideally this should be completely and explicitly outlined in the written terms of the breeding loan. But in many cases people don't even have these terms, and they just enter into these loans without really thinking about what could happen. And then you just have this nightmare after, you know, the shit hits the fan. Because I've seen so many forums where people just go off on all these stories about all these horrible things that have happened to them, and it becomes a he said, she said story, and nobody wants to be part of, you know, this kind of, you know, clusterfuck. Pardon my language, I know this is supposed to be a family channel. Okay, so even if you do a breeding loan and nothing terrible happens and your snake is returned in apparent good shape, the snake has still undergone stress from the transport. You know, it's really impossible to have a zero stress transport. Whenever you're shipping a snake, there is some level of stress. And even if the snake doesn't show any outward health issues upon return, you don't know for sure that it didn't get exposed to a pathogen or didn't, you know, undergo some kind of stressor, which may manifest at some point down the road. So it's just not something you really want to worry about. And then the other reason why a breeding loan typically doesn't make sense, it's going to take away from your enjoyment of your animals. You know, if your animal is at someone else's facility for 6 months or a year, that's time you're not getting to spend with it. And if it's a pet animal that you enjoy interacting with, you got to really ask yourself, is it worth, you know, not having access to your snake for that long? And then if you are planning on breeding it at your own facility, do you really want to lose access to the animal for your own breeding? I mean, this breeding loan might have a negative impact on the future breeding of your animal in your facility. So there's a lot of reasons why breeding loans are typically not a good idea. Here's another beautiful locality boa that I will not ever be loaning out on a breeding loan. This is a Caulker Cay dwarf boa from a small island off the coast of Belize. This one is actually a female, and I actually have her paired up right now. She's a 2016 baby, 5 years old. This is her first breeding. So far I haven't seen any overwhelming signs of breeding activity, but the breeding season is still young, so hopefully sometime in late winter or spring we'll have some confirmed gravid boa here. So, which brings me to the next point. If you are considering participating in a breeding loan, you have to ask yourself, why are you participating in this breeding loan? Okay, is it because you want to save a species from extinction and there's only 2 left and you have one of them? Or is it just because you want to shave some time off, until you can say that you've successfully bred boas? As I pointed out many times, boa breeding is a very long-term project. You're talking about 5 years from getting babies to seeing your first litter. In some cases, even more. And you really don't want to try to, make this go faster, because if you cut corners, chances are it's not going to work nearly as well. So I would highly recommend, if you are desiring to breed boas, you get babies that are of the highest quality that you can get. You grow them up responsibly. You get them acclimated to your facility, and you breed them when they're of the right age, but you really don't want to push it. Boa breeding is just not fast or easy, and that's just a fundamental truth about breeding boas. You have to be patient, you have to be in it for the long term, and you really shouldn't be trying to jump the gun. If you want a hobby that delivers quicker results, I would suggest maybe taking up paint by numbers, or maybe making something out of popsicle sticks and glue, because those will give you faster results. But for boa breeding, you really got to be in it for the long haul and be patient. And so the final words of wisdom that I want to give you guys: if you are going to embark on a boa breeding loan and you've thought about it carefully and it does make sense given the situation, a couple things I would really highly recommend that you do. And so first is, you should have everything in writing. Okay, you want to explicitly define exactly what the agreement is. Okay, what happens if the animal dies or if there is injury to the animal, what the financial incentive will be. So if you're loaning your animal, your male, to another person who has a female and they're going to breed, you want to know exactly what you're going to get out of it. Are you going to get a money payment? Are you going to get $2,000 up front regardless of what happens? Are you going to get a percentage of the babies, 20% of the babies? Are you going to get 2 or 3 babies? Okay, are you going to get the pick of the litter, your choice of 2 babies, etc.? But you want to be 100% clear what happens under any given circumstance, just so you know what you're in. It might be that if there isn't a successful breeding, then you don't get anything. That's always a risk, that you try to breed your boas and you're not successful. Okay, so the second thing I would advise is, once you have this written document that both parties have reviewed and they've agreed on, you want to have it notarized by a lawyer or by a legal professional. Okay, just so that everything is in place and it's legit and there's no question should things go south. Okay, so this is going to cost you money, and lawyers aren't cheap. And so then you might be asking yourself, well, I'm going to pay, $300-400 to have this document drafted up. I could just go out and I could pick up my own breeding stock for, a little bit more money. And that's the point. It's always better to acquire your own breeding stock, your own male and female of the species you want to breed, if you want to be a successful breeder. And I would recommend that you do this the vast majority of the times. So I hope this video was helpful, gave you some food for thought about breeding loans. I'd always love to hear your experiences if you've embarked on a breeding loan and what the outcome was. Hopefully some of you guys may have had good experiences with breeding loans. But whatever your experience, if you want to write it below, that would be great for all of the viewers to read. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot me a line. Thanks for watching and enjoy your boas.